not sure if you've noticed this, but I definitely have. There seems to be a very big anti-oil and gas or fossil fuel movement happening. I've seen it in the activist community. I've seen it on social media in terms of people forcing companies to lose support or stop their support of fossil fuel companies. We've seen demonstrations in the streets. We've seen talk about it in politics. It seems like it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And I'm wondering if that's having or will have an effect. We're going to talk about it on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And on today's episode, we're going to be talking about that, speaking up for the blue, and really looking at how people are speaking up for the planet these days. Look, we know that the planet is melting. It seems like anyway. We've seen forest fires now in Maui. We've seen forest fires across Canada and now in the Northwest Territories where there have been reported over 1,000 forest fires, just wildfires in general because of drought. And, it's affecting not only the environment, but it's affecting people's lives. We've seen a hurricane in Mexico and Southern California, as well as an earthquake at the same time. We're seeing more and more storms come up as potential hurricanes and potential tropical storms in the Southeast and in the U.S. We're seeing typhoons with large winds. We're seeing hurricanes with large winds in the Pacific that affected the Maui fires. We know that now. And we're seeing sort of like this infrastructure of, or lack thereof, in a lot of places. I just heard a press conference in Northwest Territories where there's been a lack of infrastructure in getting to try and get people out. So roads and infrastructure of like evacuation routes and so forth. If you haven't been or don't know much about Northwest Territories or the Arctic in general, even the Yukon and Nunavut territories in Canada, they're very basic communities in terms of infrastructure. They're not very well supported. A lot of that, my understanding, and this is a very novice understanding, is that it makes it difficult in the Arctic in general to maintain roads, I think. But just like I've been to Nunavut, I've been to Inuvik, and it's a couple of gravel roads. Like, it's not many paved roads in the actual city. And, you, God forbid anything happens up there, which is happening now. It's very, very scary to say, hey, there's only one road out of here. And there's, 5,000 people. In Yellowknife, where they evacuated, there were, 20,000 people. It's a lot of people to evacuate. It's a lot of people that are affected. And in communities where in Nunavut communities where it's very difficult to leave, or they don't necessarily have the transportation or the infrastructure to leave, it's very scary. So there's that aspect, right? There's obviously the aspect of, the people in Maui, indigenous people in Maui, who are very, a lot of them are starting from scratch. They have nothing. Everything was destroyed in the fires. One of their most historic and most important towns to their culture is destroyed. And, you look at the infrastructure there, it apparently some of the investigations said that it was the electric company and the lack of maintaining their infrastructure in having poles that can go down, shorting out of certain transformers, I believe, that cause sparks that could, ignite the forest in there. We're looking at a lot of things. And with all of this destruction happening, people are angry. And although there have been people who have been saying that the fossil fuel industry has been the main cause of, climate change, it seems like now more than ever, we're seeing more and more organizations, more companies forcing other people to stop their ties to, or their support and their working ties to fossil fuel companies. Now, look, I am not some person who's thinking that we can do this overnight, get rid of fossil fuels or ever end our dependence on fossil fuels. I hope that's the case at some point, because it's not helping right now, whatever they're doing, whatever we're doing. And so we need to really kind of, force the situation. But our life, the way it works right now in the West anyway, there's some places in the East as well, we're dependent on fossil fuels, on the products, not only for transportation, but also for a lot of the products that we use every day. And that's what a lot of the talking points from politicians who are on the side of the fossil fuel industry, who have the support and the money from the fossil fuel industry, like to remind environmentalists about that and conservationists about that, oh, your phone that you used or the car that brought you here is a fossil fuel car and it depends on fossil fuels. Well, yeah, of course, because our life is intertwined by it. Our economy in Canada is based off of, a lot of it is based off of oil and gas and fossil fuel industry. So, we know that we're tied to it. But now that we're starting to see even more the destruction that's coming and it's hitting our backyards, and from a Canadian perspective, the big thing right now is, or has been in the past when you argue for doing something to reduce climate change, is that, and they say something like the carbon taxes, people are like, well, we barely produce, a large percentage, or we produce a very small percentage of the world's fossil fuels or the world's greenhouse gases. So, and it's not affecting us. So why do we have to pay for some other country? Well, now look, Canada is being destroyed. It's the largest boreal forest in the world is being destroyed, and it's affecting the people's lives, not only in Northwest Territories and in the Yukon, in Nunavut, but also in Alberta, in Saskatchewan, in Manitoba, in British Columbia, in Ontario, in Quebec, in Nova Scotia, all across Canada. It's affecting us. And so there is this pressure and this anger from people saying we need to do something about it. And in fact, as I'm recording this podcast, there's reports out that the fossil fuel industry is working with PR firms to say, hey, you know what? Climate change is so bad right now that there's really nothing you can do about it. So while we might as well just continue on and try and innovate our way out of this. And actually, one of the candidates from the Republicans is saying the same thing. He went in the Republican presidential debate and said that the climate change policy is just a hoax. The climate change policies that are out there are going to ruin America. That's what he says. And so he says the only way we can do something about it is use the fossil fuel industry to innovate our way out of it, even though the fossil fuel industry is one of the main causes of climate change. So you see, the fossil fuel industry does not have the individuals in their needs, their wants, their genuine just health and the health of the planet in mind. They couldn't care less. All they care about is the money that they have and the money that they can get from further developing and drilling for oil. That's what it is. That's all it is. Let's be honest about that. So we're seeing more and more of a movement. And I wanted to kind of bring to light a couple of things that I've seen. So I've talked about the Just Stop Oil organization. I'm working with one of their people to get them on to talk more about sort of their methods. If you're not aware, Just Stop Oil is an organization out of the UK that is doing demonstrations, or have been doing demonstrations, where they walk very slowly in the streets. They disrupt rush hour traffic on some very major roads, and people don't like it. And people are getting angry. And I had an episode on that in terms of activists and what is really good and what is really effective. And we're going to talk to them about that hopefully soon. I was just on vacation, and so I couldn't do actually both of us were on vacation and we couldn't do the interview. But, we're hoping to do that interview soon. And so I think, we'll get that interview, but there's also a really interesting group that I've sort of joined on Slack, and that's called Clean Creatives. And this is a movement that I saw, somebody from FutureSwell, Carissa, who's one of the co-founders, and she did this Clean Creatives, where Clean Creatives is basically a group of people, an organization that are out to make sure that companies divest their ties to fossil fuels and their support from fossil fuels, which I think is a really interesting thing. And so I kind of did the same thing, on a TikTok. I saw it on TikTok, on FutureSwell's TikTok, and I said, okay, I'm going to do this as well. Did it on TikTok and said, you need to really stop supporting companies and supporting people who are supporting fossil fuel companies as much as possible. And I think that's something interesting. And you can sign up, like on a petition, you can sign up to do that, which is really interesting. And then there was an article that I saw that is it's a sort of like a PR firm that is putting pressure on, or not. I guess it's saying you can put pressure on people who are trying to, or putting pressure on companies that are like B Corp companies to say, hey, the PR firms that are on B Corps should not have any ties or should not have any clients that are from the fossil fuel industry. And that should be one of the, I guess, criteria to get B Corp certified. And so if you don't know what B Corps are organizations and companies that want to have a purpose and they want to have an impact. And so what they do is they get this, so there's this separate body that audits each company that wants to be part of a B Corp, that wants to say they can be a B Corp. And they have to go through this audit every certain number of years. And then they get certified or they don't get certified, and they work on things to increase their score. There's a certification score of how good or how compliant they are to this audit. And I think it's really interesting because as a consumer, as somebody who's trying to find sponsors for the show, it's a really good start to start with B Corps, because I want to have somebody on the podcast who's a sponsor who's actually doing something good and is doing everything they can to make it as great as possible and have the biggest impact as possible. We can never be perfect. I'm never expecting that. But those who are striving to be better is really great to see. And so I want to support that, and I want them to be introduced to you through sponsorships on this podcast. So that'll hopefully be coming in the future in companies that are very similar to that. And that's sort of, and Clean Creatives it's an organization that's saying, hey, we need to talk more about this. We need to talk more to companies. We need to make sure that more and more people are trying to, divulge their support of fossil fuels. And you're just seeing it everywhere. People are like, we got to stop. They're getting PR companies to stop, perpetuating the sort of, the lies of the fossil fuel companies when it comes to climate change. And we're trying, and these, organizations are trying to disrupt things so much, like just regular things we do, like as in going to work or bringing your kids to school and coming home, to make more people angry and try and convince the government to stop with these oil projects. And we're seeing more and more people like that. And we're even seeing when Vivek, and I don't know his last name, the pronunciation of his last name, he is the Republican candidate that I talked about earlier. When he called the climate change policy a hoax, he got booed at a Republican, presidential debate. He got booed. That was interesting to see, because typically Republicans or conservatives are not very focused on climate change. We're seeing more and more people say, hey, you know what? Even if you don't believe in climate change, which is really happening, there's got to be something done about wildfires, about drought, about flooding, about storms and management of that. There needs to be more that's done in the infrastructure point and protecting people from these devastating wildfires, from these devastating hurricanes and tornadoes and earthquakes and all that kind of stuff. We need to do more. We need to invest more money in protecting infrastructure and protecting the environment and making sure that we act on things and not just let developers, not just let fossil fuel companies have a run with our environment, right? We need to protect the people. It's time that the politicians start working for the people and not for the companies that support them. I think that is a great way forward, is to really get the people who are making the decisions and the policies to be divested from their support of fossil fuel industry. Get that out of the way. It's a huge conflict of interest. Any fossil fuel or any organization or company that is supporting a group of people that because they want them in, because they like because their policies will be more favorable to them doing business, instead of protecting the people and looking out for the people that actually elected them in there. That should never happen. It's a huge conflict of interest. It's a huge conflict of interest. And so, even starting with the politicians, not only just the companies, but the politicians, and say, you need to stop taking money for support on your campaigns from fossil fuel companies. It doesn't matter where you are in the world. You should not, if you live in a democratic society and you are allowed to take campaign donations, it should not be from companies who directly benefit from you being in power. That doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense to me at all. And I might be on a bit of a rant here, but I am fully in support of this movement to take away a lot of the the leaders and the companies who, and just not just take away, but convince them to stop perpetuating these lies. Just stop perpetuating these lies. One of the lies that I find hilarious that the Conservative government in Canada is trying to do, or it's not the Conservative government, but the opposition. The leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, is going on a campaign to say that the carbon tax is the reason why one of the reasons why we have inflation, why it's so high. That's not true. That's not true. 90% of the money that comes from residents that pay the carbon tax in each province comes back to them after their taxes are paid. And 10% goes into clean energy. Is the program perfect? No, it's not at all. Do I agree with it perfectly? No. Can it be better? Yes, but it's in there, and we're putting money towards green energy and renewables. But because nothing else is being done. The opposition, the Conservatives, are not proposing anything on climate change because they're supported by oil and gas, and they have no plan for it. At least the Liberals, who are also supported by oil and gas, and they should not be supported, but they actually have a climate change plan. They do. They have a climate change plan. And people, if you vote for a party that doesn't have a climate change plan in Canada or in the US or wherever, I don't know what you're thinking. Look at us. Look at the world right now, the state that it's in. It's not getting better. It's not going to get better until we really start to move the needle. And we need to move it faster, and including adaptation as well as reduction of things that cause climate change. And even if it stopped today, we are still going to see the consequences for years to come. So we need to really, really work hard to be able to do this. We need to make drastic changes to our lives. We're working at it, but just we got to do it. We got to go faster. And I'm gonna work on making episodes that are a little bit more climate optimism, because we need to find out where are we at with all this? How are we doing? Have greenhouse gases gone down? Have they gone up? What sector is the highest? What sector is the lowest? We need to find out more about that, and I'm going to try and do that over the next couple of months. But I've just noticed this is happening. I want to know if you notice this is happening, and are you doing something about it personally, or as part of your organization, or as your organization or the company that you're working for, are they doing something about it? I think it would be really interesting to have that conversation. And you can have that conversation with me on Instagram. You can DM me at How to Protect the Ocean, all one word, at How to Protect the Ocean on Instagram. And I would love to hear from you. I'm also on Threads, so I'd love to hear from you as well from that. But this is something that I think we can really drive a great conversation and find out which organizations, which movements are doing a really good job, and how we can help. So that'd be really great. And but that's it for today's episode. I want to thank you so much for joining us. If you want to share this episode with somebody who's interested in, this type of topic, climate, divesting their support or work, supporting companies that are divesting their support from fossil fuels, that would be greatly appreciated. All you have to do is just click the copy link in whatever app you're listening to, and then just send it to them. That's it. It's free. It's free to do so, and it helps build our audience, and it helps get more people informed on what's happening in the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to act for a better ocean. So that's it for today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.